So here's a broad question. Why do people get divorced?
I feel like this is like, what is a woman? Because they don't want to be married anymore. No, why do people get divorced? I think there's a lot of reasons why people get divorced. If I was going to take like a big answer for that.
I guess I'll narrow it down.
Yeah.
What do you think is the main, what we often hear is that money is the main reason people get divorced. Is that true in your experience?
I don't think that's true at all. That's not true in my experience. I think money is a source of tension between people. It gives people something to fight over. I will actually say, now that I represent people primarily in the high net worth space and even ultra high net worth space, like hundreds of millions of dollars, that the more money people have, the less incentive they have to be reasonable with each other, because the money doesn't really mean anything anymore. So if they spend $2 million in counsel fees, they don't really care. And if they got an extra million or two in the divorce, they don't really care. Because if you're getting $100 million, getting $102 million isn't going to change your quality of life that much. So I don't think money conflict is really like the precipitating factor of people's divorces. More commonly, people say infidelity, cheating. And cheating is absolutely present in a majority of the cases that come into a divorce lawyer's office in some form, whether it's an emotional affair, whether it's a physical affair, whether it's a dalliance or like a long-term affair, like a full relationship. Those are very commonly present. But I think it's actually overly simplistic to say that was the cause of the divorce, because I think fundamentally marriages end because of disconnection. I think we fall in love very fast. Like, love is an emotion and love is a verb. It's an action. So like the emotion of love, you feel very quickly. You feel attraction, you like this person, everything they say is funny, they brush past you and it sends a tingle through you. Like, we've all been there. But that's not a real foundation to build something on, you know? And if it causes you to stop seeing this person clearly and talking about important things like shared values, shared upbringing, like what is our worldview and what was it put together by? And, you know, what are our thoughts about faith or what the goal of life is or the meaning of life is? We don't have some commonality towards that. So I think what really happens is we fall out of love the way we go bankrupt, which is very slowly and then all at once. And divorce is what happens when you get to the all at once. But to say that the infidelity was the cause, no. The disconnections back earlier, that's when you could have steered out of this thing by trying to figure out a way to either reconnect or better, stay connected.
So you think that the infidelity is what happens during the free fall, during the all at once?
It's done by then, I think. It's done by then. I'm not saying, I've seen a lot of people come back from affairs. That's not something people like to talk about publicly, you know, because in the sort of, again, current climate, current zeitgeist, like it's not cool to like forgive your spouse for an affair. But a lot of couples do work through things like that. They say, yeah, I did something really stupid and I shouldn't have, and I got distracted. I lost the plot of the story we're writing together, and I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Like, we shouldn't disconnect. Like, we should figure out a way to work through this together for the benefit of our children and for the benefit of each other, you know? And people move on. They go to counseling, or they work with a rabbi or a priest or whoever they're going to work with to like reconnect in real ways. But you know, it's very easy. Like, wouldn't it be great if there's just one thing you could blame everything on? So that's what happens sometimes, is he has an affair, or she has an affair. And then that becomes, well, we got divorced because he had an affair. It's like, your marriage had so many problems with it. Like, his affair was one of them, but it showed up way after some of these other things.
In your experience, is it men or women that are more likely to have an affair, or is it?
That's changed a lot in recent years. I've been doing this 25 years, so I've seen a lot of trends in that time. It used to be mostly men having affairs that were the sort of, the precipitating factor of the marriage ending. But I would say in the last 5-10 years, a lot more women having affairs, a lot more.
Do they have affairs differently? Is it a different sort of thing?
You know, I've been asked that before. I don't really know that I could say that it's that different. I think all affairs are kind of equally ridiculous. I mean, when you see them as a divorce lawyer, you see them differently. Like we have like the text messages that got revealed, and like, and when you read this stuff, you just kind of look like we're so ridiculous. Like as a species, we're just so silly. Like we think we're being sexy, or we think and it's just preposterous when you read this stuff. But I mean, I think women tend to, in my experience, in my office, the affair is like, okay, I found a soft place to land. Like I'm leaving and I've got the next one lined up. Whereas men, a lot of times it's just they're being idiots. They're not thinking clearly. They're just, it's more sexual in nature. It's less about like, I've had a lot of, because I represent people who've been cheated on, and I represent people who've done the cheating. Like I represent perpetrators of domestic violence, I represent victims of domestic violence. Like I represent my client, and you very often don't know what's really going on until you've already been retained, and then you're in. You're in this case, so you're kind of stuck with your client. And I will say that I've had a lot of clients that you spend time with these people, and you kind of get it. Like I've had clients who come in and say, yeah, like I had this affair and she found out about it, usually because of the iPad, like the iMessage thing. The kids have an iPad, and then you have your iPhone, and you don't realize your iMessage is hooked to your iPad. And now the kid starts seeing text messages from the secret girlfriend, like very common. I feel like Apple is probably responsible for more divorces than they realize. Facebook too, Instagram, Meta. There's really big tech companies have not been great for marriage. But
so these are not evil geniuses having these affairs, apparently, that they
don't
realize.
They're just people. They're just flawed people. But I tell you, I've had a lot of clients in my office who, particularly men, who had affairs. And they're like legitimately heartbroken. I mean, they're sitting across from me saying, like, this had nothing to do with my wife. Like, and they don't realize how crazy that sounds, Like I do, because I'm going to have to argue to a judge, so I'm very mindful of how something sounds. But you'll say, what do you mean it had nothing to do with your wife? And they're like, I wasn't even thinking about my wife. And I go, well, that's the problem, is you should have been. But they really are sincere when they say, but I really love my wife. I love the family we have together. I love the history we have. I love our children. I love her parents. But we don't have that connection anymore that we had, like a romantic or sexual connection. And, again, I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not a therapist, but like sex is the glue. I mean, what's the difference between a roommate and a spouse? Like you have a romantic and sexual connection to this person. And if that's gone completely out of the marriage, or it used to be 90% of your relationship and now it's 1%, like that's not healthy. That's not a good idea. Like that's not necessarily a human, a human needs not being met there. So I'm not saying the answer is go have an affair. I don't think that's the answer at all. I can tell you from ringside seats, that's actually the worst way to approach that. But acknowledging it's a problem, I think, could be a good start.
Yeah, I mean, you say that in society we don't like to talk about the possibility of forgiveness after an affair, which is true. I'd say we even less do we like to talk about what you can do to help affair-proof your marriage.
Yeah.
What you can do to sort of prevent your spouse from having an affair. Because if we talk about that, then it sounds like, well, you're victim blaming.
Right.
So I guess we've already sort of covered this, but what is it? I find as a married man myself, the idea of having an affair, I honestly find it mysterious. Like, and I'm sure everybody says that, but it, not only because I love my wife and I would never do that, but also, even on top of that, this is the thing that ruins everyone's life. You see just what an absolute, how it just lays to waste lives.
Everyone involved.
Everybody involved.
Everyone.
And it's like, there's nothing in the world less appealing than that. And yet people do it. It's very common. So what is it that...
Well, I think that's a testament to how deep our desire for connection and romantic and sexual connection is. And I think when you talk to people that have successful marriages, the majority of the time, they still, find like time to make sure that they're exciting to each other, that they're loving to each other, that they, that they pay attention. A lot of it's about just paying attention. That talking about, what you need from each other in an honest way, having difficult conversations when you have to, neither dwelling in what's wrong in the relationship nor denying it all the time. Like, I think, look, you're married, you have 6 kids. Like right now, you're at the stage in life where you guys are just trying to like manage this like massive, you're running a childcare center together basically. And just find in the midst of that, some affection and connection and love for each other in some way. Like that's, again, is it sex? Is it attention? Is it compliments? Is it praise? Like when you talk to men who are happily, successfully married, they'll very often say like, yeah, I make a point of like telling my wife how beautiful she still is and how I would still pick her out of it. Even just now when you were describing your marriage, you're like, well, I wouldn't do that because I'm crazy about my wife and I've got a really great wife. Like, okay, well, I'm sure you tell her that. I'm sure, the cynical, jaded, Matt Walsh, when he's alone with his wife, is very honest about how lucky he is and how blessed he feels and how much he admires the mother she is. Like these are all, what does it cost to do that, to say that to your spouse? And I think and what does it take for a wife, and again, I've never been a wife, but like what does it take to make your husband feel smart or sexy? We've created these ridiculous tropes of like the wife who's like, oh, he's such an idiot to the husband. And the husband who's like, oh, I married the most loathsome harpy ever to castrate a man. And this is somehow cute. This is somehow funny, and it's not. It's not. It's a recipe for disaster. Like talk to married people who are happily married. And this is what I said on one of the shows I was on that caught your ire and made your show, which I was, as a fan, stoked when I was mentioned by you. But I said marriage is like the lottery. You're probably not going to win. But if you win, what you win is so good that it's worth buying a ticket. Now, you rightfully and fairly criticized that because A, the lottery's out of my control, whereas marriage isn't out of my control. It's not completely out of my control. There's parts of it that are out of my control. And of course, the chances of winning the lottery are infinitesimally smaller than the chances of a successful marriage. What I meant is that it's so good. It's the jackpot. Like 50% approximately of marriages end in divorce. And you've got to assume there's another at least 10, 20% that are unhappy, but staying together either for economic reasons or because of the kids. That's bad. That's bad numbers. It really is. It doesn't mean you shouldn't get married, but it's bad numbers. It means you should take this seriously. My son, who's 27, got engaged a couple of weeks ago to his longtime girlfriend. And I am cheering for them. Like, I'm glad he's getting married. I think that it is a really, really beautiful thing to do. And if it were, my parents were married for over 50 years till my mom passed away. And their lives were better for the fact that they were together and loved each other really well. But, is it, like, take it seriously. Take it really seriously. Don't think that this is just a simple thing. Like, oh yeah, we're madly in love with each other. We like each other now. We've picked each other out of the 8 billion people in the world. So all we got to do now is just sort of ride this thing and it'll be fine. No. Like, you have to be vigilant and protect this thing.
Just real quickly, and I asked this because I don't know, you mentioned the 50% divorce statistic. It seems like it's really difficult to get actual statistics on this. And is the 50% accurate from your?
Yeah, 50%. I mean, it's the reason why I'm sticky with this is that when they talk about the divorce rate being over 50%, they're including people who are married multiple times. And when you're married more than once, like second time, third time, the statistics get worse each one. So the divorce rate in subsequent marriages is higher than the divorce rate for first-time married people. So when you put all of those together in one category, it skews it upwards. But some of this is just a bunch of people really bad at marriage who keep getting married over and over. I had one guy that did 4 out of his 5 divorces and 3 of his prenups. And like, he just kept getting married, And I wanted to say to him, like, I appreciate the sort of annuity that's coming with this, but you're just bad at being married. Don't be married. Like, you're not good at it, But again, he kept trying. It's the triumph of faith over reason, I guess. But I think the statistics are tricky. The other problem is the people who stay married but legally separate, like guy goes out for milk and never comes back, and they don't actually divorce, because the statistics are compiled based on what's called a certificate of dissolution of marriage, which is you file with the state when you finalize a divorce. There's a lot of people that even don't go about getting divorced. They just split. They just move out and that's it. And then there's people that stay together and are pretty miserable, but they never get divorced. So the lowest that the statistic is ever quoted as being for first-time marriage failure is like 43%, which is still really bad. To put it in perspective, Toyota had a car that had like a 0.0001% of the cars. There was a problem with the brake line. They recalled all the cars. And they said it's going to cost us millions and millions of dollars, but that is too high of a risk. Like, think about even if it's 40%, that's a giant number of people with a giant amount of misery. Like, it's a really profound thing to get divorced.
I think that's, even 40% obviously is way, way, way too high. The only, the stipulation I always like to make is that, let's say the divorce rate is 40%. It doesn't follow necessarily that your individual risk of getting divorced is 40%.
Absolutely.
Because there are,
absolutely.
Right, there are things that you can do that we've already talked about.
There's a ton of things you can do. And just the fact that you asked the question, what can I do to not get divorced or not be in a place where divorce is anything other than a fleeting thought when I'm angry at my spouse in the moment? And there's plenty you can do.